The Bible preserves accounts that capture attention, and one of them involves a prophet whose impact did not end with his death. Elisha was someone who lived so deeply with God that his story continued to speak even after his days came to an end. The biblical text reports that some time after the prophet's death, a man was hastily thrown into his tomb. When he touched the bones of Elisha, something unexpected happened. That man came back to life, an event that astonishes and raises many questions. This episode leads us to reflect on the way Elisha lived before God. What kind of relationship did he build so that divine action would still be manifested even after his death? What does this story reveal about spiritual authority, anointing, and the power of God, which is not limited by time or by human circumstances? This is not merely an isolated miracle. This account shows that God's work does not depend on someone's physical presence, but on an entire life marked by faithfulness, obedience, and commitment to the divine purpose. In this video, we will get to know the complete journey of Elisha, the prophet who succeeded Elijah, and became known for so many miracles, including this extraordinary sign that marked his story even after his death. And before we begin, I ask that you leave a like so that this message can reach more people, and together we can spread the word of God. Elisha appears in the Bible as an ordinary person connected to the simple life of the countryside. He was not in the spotlight, nor did he hold any religious position. His daily life was marked by hard work, plowing the land with 12 yoke of oxen, repeating the same task every day. Everything seemed normal, predictable, with nothing that drew attention. No one would imagine that from such a simple setting, a story would arise that would cross generations. The book of 1 Kings in chapter 19 shows something important about the way God works. Elisha was busy, fulfilling his responsibilities and doing well what was in his hands. God's calling does not happen in a special moment, inside a temple or during a ceremony. It happens in the midst of real life, while the work is being done. Even there in the field, God had already outlined a clear purpose for Elisha. During that same period, Elijah was walking through Israel following the commands of the Lord. His story was already marked by difficult confrontations, spiritual challenges, and profound experiences with God. Now, however, a new stage was about to begin. God himself directs Elijah to the exact place where Elisha was working, showing that the divine calling never comes by chance. The meeting between the two happens in a simple way, without speeches or long explanations. Elijah simply approaches and throws his cloak over Elisha. This gesture carried a strong meaning. The cloak symbolized spiritual authority, continuity, and responsibility. Without needing to say anything, Elijah made it clear that God had chosen Elisha to carry on the prophetic mission in Israel. Elisha immediately understands the meaning of that gesture. Even without hearing explanations, he realizes that his life had been called to something greater. His heart responds without delay. Even so, he asks Elijah for permission to say goodbye to his parents. This request reveals balance and maturity. Elisha accepts the calling, but he does not ignore his origins, his family, and everything that had been part of his story. Elijah's response is brief and direct, making it clear that the decision was personal and had to come from Elisha himself. Soon after, Elisha takes a striking action. He returns to the field, takes the oxen he used in his work, and offers them as a sacrifice. The tools that once ensured his livelihood now become firewood for the altar. This gesture sends a clear message to everyone around. Elisha was not merely accepting a new path, he was bringing the old one to an end. His choice was definitive. By doing this, Elisha demonstrates that his surrender was complete. Life in the countryside had already fulfilled its role. The past was left behind, and a new identity began to be built. By sharing the meat with the people, he turns his decision into a testimony, publicly showing his faith and his obedience to God's calling. After this, Elisha begins to walk alongside Elijah. He ceases to be merely a rural worker and takes on the position of an apprentice. The Bible shows that Elisha becomes an attentive servant, willing to observe, listen, and learn. The calling had already been given, but the process of preparation was only just beginning. In silence and faithfulness, God starts to shape his character, his humility, and his perseverance day after day. This beginning shows that God's calling is born in everyday life, grows through obedience, and is strengthened through renunciation. Elisha begins his journey without prominence, without praise, and without public recognition. What he has is a willing heart and a firm decision. This is how the foundation of a deep story is built, marked by a transformed life, faithful service, and commitment to God, which would still reveal much about the Lord's work through his servant. Before any visibility, Elisha enters a long and silent period. The Bible does not describe many details of this phase, but what little it records is full of meaning. He becomes known as the one who poured water on the hands of Elijah, as stated in 2 Kings chapter 3. This simple description reveals a conscious choice. Elisha learns by serving, grows by obeying, and matures by walking closely with the prophet. Serving Elijah meant living alongside someone who experienced intense encounters with God. Elisha witnesses difficult moments, exhausting journeys, meetings with kings, and situations of great spiritual tension. He does not yet occupy a position of prominence, nor does he make important decisions, but he observes everything attentively. When Elijah speaks, Elisha listens. When Elijah acts, Elisha learns. When Elijah prays, Elisha understands the value of silence before God. This time reveals an essential truth of the spiritual journey. The calling comes before visibility. Elisha had already been chosen, but he needed to go through the process of formation. By accompanying Elijah, he learns that the prophetic word is neither simple nor light. It carries responsibility, spiritual weight, and real consequences. Every message delivered to kings involves authority, but also risks. By observing Elijah, Elisha learns how to position himself before power, how to confront corruption, and how to remain firm even in the face of opposition. During this period, Elisha also witnesses confrontations with false prophets. In these situations, he learns that true spiritual life is not found in appearances or in the search for prominence, but in faithfulness to the word of the Lord. While many tried to draw attention to themselves, Elijah remained firm in God's purpose. Thus, Elisha understands that spiritual authority walks hand in hand with obedience. The prophetic word is not born as a spectacle, but as a response to the voice of God. Daily service gradually shapes Elisha's inner life. Pouring water on Elijah's hands seemed like something simple, but it carried deep meaning. It was a gesture of care, support, and willingness to serve. Every task, no matter how small, was part of a greater process. Elisha learns that serving someone called by God is also a form of worship. Along this path, he develops humility, patience, and spiritual sensitivity, far from the public eye. Living alongside Elijah reveals that the prophetic ministry is not easy. It demands consistency, perseverance, and daily faithfulness. Elisha realizes that moments of victory alternate with periods of weariness. He sees Elijah facing threats, rejection, and misunderstanding, yet maintaining inner steadfastness. These experiences prepare Elisha for the challenges that would come in the future, even before he occupies any position of prominence. During this period, Elisha grows spiritually without haste. Each day alongside Elijah becomes a lesson. Learning emerges through journeys, simple conversations, and also through long moments of silence. God works in Elisha's heart while he remains attentive and available. The formation of the prophet takes place in a gradual, solid, and profound way. This discrete phase reveals an important truth. God first transforms the heart before manifesting power. Elisha continues as a servant, an apprentice, and an observer. His identity is built through daily faithfulness, far from human recognition. The story moves forward quietly, yet full of meaning, preparing the way for events that would later reveal God's action even more intensely in Elisha's life. After many years walking together, the most decisive moment of this journey arrives. Elijah already carries in his heart the certainty that his mission is coming to an end. Elisha remains by his side, attentive to every step, sensing that something definitive is about to happen. Their path takes them through places marked in the spiritual history of Israel, until they reach the banks of the Jordan River, a location filled with meaning since ancient generations. At the edge of the river, Elijah takes his cloak and strikes the waters. Immediately the Jordan opens, allowing them to cross on dry ground as recorded in 2 Kings chapter 2. This sign once again confirms the spiritual authority that had always accompanied Elijah's life. After the crossing, the prophet turns to Elisha and grants him the opportunity to make one final request before his departure. The atmosphere is marked by silence, reverence, and deep spiritual expectation. Aware of the importance of that moment, Elisha makes a bold and meaningful request. He asks for a double portion of the Spirit that was upon Elijah. This request does not arise from a desire for recognition, but from an awareness of the responsibility that lay ahead. Elisha understands that the mission would require spiritual strength, discernment, and a deep relationship with God. Elijah recognizes the weight of that request and responds that its fulfillment would depend on Elisha's attention and faithfulness until the end. As they continue walking and talking, something extraordinary happens. A chariot of fire, accompanied by horses of fire, appears and separates the two. Elijah is taken up to heaven in a whirlwind before Elisha's attentive eyes. The disciple watches everything with reverence, understanding that this moment marks a definitive turning point in the prophetic history of Israel. Thus, Elijah's ministry comes to an end in a glorious way, confirming a life entirely marked by the presence of the Lord. As Elijah is taken to heaven, his cloak falls to the ground. Elisha approaches, picks up the cloak, and keeps it. This gesture carries deep meaning. The cloak represents the continuity of the mission, spiritual responsibility, and the inheritance left by Elijah. With it in his hands, Elisha returns toward the Jordan River, now aware that the calling had passed to him. Upon reaching the riverbank again, Elisha uses the cloak, strikes the waters, and calls upon the God of Elijah. Just as before, the Jordan opens, allowing him to cross. This moment clearly confirms everything that had been built over the years in silence, service, and faithfulness. The power that once worked through Elijah now manifests itself in Elisha's life. The sons of the prophets, who were watching from a distance, understand what has happened. They publicly recognize that the Spirit that was upon Elijah now rests upon Elisha. This recognition marks the visible beginning of Elisha's prophetic ministry before the people, as reported in 2 Kings. From that moment on, there is no doubt about who had been chosen by God to continue the work. The crossing of the Jordan goes beyond the repetition of a miracle. It symbolizes divine approval, the continuity of purpose, and the confirmation of the calling. Elisha returns from the other side of the river transformed. The servant becomes a spiritual leader. The apprentice comes to occupy the place of God's spokesperson in Israel. The prophetic word begins to flow through him with authority and direction. This episode teaches that spiritual inheritance does not arise suddenly. It is built through faithfulness, perseverance, and a life lived consistently before God. The story of Elisha shows that the Lord continues to act throughout generations, raising up people who are prepared to carry on his work. The cloak that falls makes it clear that the mission moves forward, sustained by the same divine presence that guided the prophets since ancient times. Unlike the ministry of his master, Elisha's work draws even closer to the daily life of the people. He acts in villages, in simple homes, and along the roads where ordinary people pass. The prophetic message remains firm, but it is now accompanied by practical actions of care, provision, and restoration. The presence of God is manifested in a close and tangible way, reaching real and urgent needs of everyday life. At the very beginning of his ministry, Elisha faces a problem that directly affected the lives of the people. The waters of Jericho were unfit for use, harming the land and bringing suffering to its inhabitants. Faced with this situation, the people seek the prophet for help. Following the guidance of the Lord, Elisha throws salt into the spring and declares that those waters would be healed. From that moment on, the source begins to produce life again. This miracle shows that God cares even about what sustains the daily life of his people. On another occasion, the Bible presents the story of a widow who was living in a moment of great despair. Burdened with debts and about to lose her children, she seeks Elisha for help. The prophet instructs the woman to gather borrowed vessels and to trust in the action of God. The little oil that was in her house begins to multiply and fills all the containers. As a result, she is able to pay her debts and secure provision for her family. This episode teaches that when faith is accompanied by obedience, divine provision is revealed. Another striking account involves a Shunammite woman, known for her generosity. Whenever Elisha passed through her town, she offered him shelter. In response to this care, God grants her a son, bringing joy to her household. Years later, the child becomes ill and dies unexpectedly. Even overwhelmed by grief, the woman maintains her trust in God. Elisha prays, persists before the Lord, and the boy returns to life. Joy comes back to that home, showing that God acts even when everything seems lost. Elisha's ministry also reaches people outside Israel. One example is Naaman, commander of the army of Syria, who suffered from leprosy. When he seeks help, he receives a simple instruction to immerse himself in the waters of the Jordan River. After overcoming his pride and obeying the word of the prophet, Naaman is completely healed. His skin is restored and his heart comes to acknowledge the true God. This episode shows that the grace of God has no limits and reaches all who submit themselves to his word. Even situations that seem small receive Elisha's attention. On a certain occasion, while the disciples of the prophets were working, an axe head fell into the water. The tool was borrowed, and its loss caused great concern. Elisha acts with care and sensitivity. He throws a piece of wood into the place, and the axe head floats. This simple miracle carries a profound lesson. God cares about every detail of the lives of those who walk according to his will. These signs, recorded throughout the book of 2 Kings, especially between chapters 2 and 6, reveal a God who is close and attentive to human needs. Elisha's ministry reflects this constant care. Each miracle conveys hope, restoration, and spiritual direction. God manifests himself both in extraordinary events and in the most common needs of everyday life. Even in the final years of his life, Elisha remains faithful to the calling he received. Time passes, his body grows weak, but his spiritual authority remains firm. The Bible reports that he becomes seriously ill in chapter 13 of 2 Kings, and even so, his presence continues to carry deep spiritual significance. Kings continue to seek him out, for they recognize that his words remain aligned with the will of God. Illness affects the body, but Elisha's heart remains sensitive to the voice of the Lord. Among the visits received by Elisha, one stands out, that of King Joash. When he finds the prophet already very weak, the king is moved and recognizes how important Elisha had been for Israel. Before him stood a man who had devoted his entire life to spiritually guiding the nation. Even though his body was frail, Elisha delivers a message full of meaning. He instructs the king to perform a symbolic act with arrows, explaining that each gesture represented victories that God would grant to the people. The lesson is clear. When human actions follow divine guidance, they become instruments to fulfill God's purposes. Even limited by illness, Elisha continues to demonstrate clarity, discernment, and spiritual authority. His words still guide, correct, and reveal consequences. This scene shows that the value of a servant of God is not found in physical strength, but in the faithfulness built throughout life. Until the end, Elisha remains a spiritual reference, fulfilling his mission with responsibility and reverence before the Lord. After this period, Elisha dies and is buried. The Bible reports this moment in a simple way, without many details, yet full of meaning. The prophet departs, but his story remains connected to God's action in Israel. Even after his death, unexpected events show that his influence continues to manifest in surprising ways. Some time later, during a hurried burial because of external threats, a dead man is thrown into the tomb where Elisha had been buried. When he touches the prophet's bones, that man immediately comes back to life and stands up. This episode, recorded in 2 Kings chapter 13, causes great impact. It reveals that God's action goes beyond natural limits and that a life devoted to the Lord continues to bear fruit even after the end. This episode reveals a very clear spiritual truth. Power comes from God, but he chooses to act through people who live faithfully. Elisha chose obedience, walked according to the will of the Lord, and became an instrument of restoration, provision, and spiritual direction. Even after his death, the testimony of his life remains alive in the Scriptures. The story shows that God's work does not end with someone's life. What the Lord establishes continues to produce fruit. Elisha becomes an example of a life fully surrendered to the divine purpose, in which every stage, from calling to old age, is part of a greater plan. His journey teaches that faithfulness, obedience, and intimacy with God build a legacy that crosses generations. This account also brings a very important lesson. What truly transforms the world around us is not the visibility we have, but the faithfulness we practice when no one is watching. Elisha did not begin his story in the spotlight. He was not called inside a temple or at a moment of spiritual recognition. His calling happened in the midst of ordinary work, while he was faithfully carrying out his responsibilities. This shows that God works in daily life, in simple routines, and in everyday tasks. Many times we wait for great signs to begin something with God, but Elisha's story reveals that purpose is born exactly where we are. Another essential lesson is that calling comes before recognition. Elisha had already been chosen, but he spent years serving, learning, observing, and being shaped in silence. He did not try to rush the process or look for shortcuts. He accepted the time of preparation with humility. This teaches us that spiritual maturity is built with patience, consistency, and obedience. God works first on character before manifesting power. Another striking teaching is that God cares both about great problems and about details that seem small. Elisha was used by God to heal contaminated waters, bring the dead back to life, multiply oil, heal leprosy, and even make an axe head float. This shows that no area of our life is insignificant to God. He cares for the spiritual, the emotional, and also the material. God is concerned with what sustains our daily lives. Finally, the story of Elisha leaves a profound lesson about legacy. A life lived in faithfulness continues to speak even after the end. The miracle that happens after his death does not highlight the prophet, but glorifies the God he served. This teaches us that true legacy is not found in fame, position, or human recognition, but in a life aligned with the will of God. What we build in obedience today can bless other people tomorrow, even when we are no longer here. The life of Elisha invites us to reflect. Do not live only for the present, live for the purpose. Do not seek to be seen, seek to be faithful. Because when God is present in someone's life, the impact goes beyond time, circumstances, and even death. If this message spoke to your heart, share it so that more people may come to know the Word of God. May God bless you.